This is Bumper to Bumper, the car show. Drive in anxious and cruise out confident. With the best automotive information for your vehicle. And now your hosts, Matt Allen and Dave Riccio.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bumper Radio. I am Dave Riccio here along with Matt Allen, and together we are your KTAR car guys, heard every Saturday from 11 to noon. At Bumper to Bumper Radio, we're helping you, the motoring public, have a better overall car experience. If you've got car questions, we've got car answers. So we encourage you to give us a call at 602-277-5827, 602-277-KTAR. And today on the Bumper to Bumper Roadmap, we're going to have some tips of the week, open phones and texts, of course, and to service or not to service your transmission. And this is something interesting. Transmissions fail 4-1 over engines. And that's partially a made-up statistic by me, but how often are people replacing engines and how often transmissions? It happens way more that you're at a transmission shop getting a transmission than an engine, and we all take care of our engines. We get them serviced every 3,000, every 5,000 miles. We get an oil change, but we never do anything with that stinking transmission, and that's the thing you're going to end up buying because you didn't take care of it. And there is so much bad information about transmission service and how to take care of them. And Matt, I mean, you talk to 10 different shops. There's transmission service means 10 different things to 10 different shops.
Well, auto repair is very subjective. I mean, it's just one of those things. Everybody has a different opinion now on how something goes. Someone might say, rebuild my transmission. And that means a whole lot of different things to maybe 3 or 4 different people. Some guy might rebuild that transmission with as little as parts as possible, only replace the things that are worn out. But maybe there's a wear item that's not worn out. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff. But, you know, it's hot today. We had a record yesterday. It's hotter than heck today. And what's the number one killer of transmissions?
Heat kills transmissions. And the fluid breaks down.
Does it really kill the transmission, or it kills the fluid, and then the fluid doesn't work well? I mean, is that kind of how that works?
Both. I think when you heat up mechanical parts, I think it just changes tolerances a lot. And your fluid is really taxed. And the fluid breaks down. It starts to oxidize with the heat. But I'm just going to there's all kinds of myths about transmission service. But probably if I'm just going to pick the number one myth that I hear every day is my transmission is sealed and it doesn't need service. That's the number one myth, and it's kind of like a unicorn. I've never seen a sealed transmission. I've been looking, but I still haven't seen one. Matt, why the heck do people say the transmission's sealed? And I think the number one reason is they took the dipstick away. So there's no dipstick because the manufacturers, A, save money on the dipstick, and B, they don't want the common consumer looking at transmission fluid. But how does that now become the sealed transmission?
Well, I think it's like a lot of things. I think those rumors or myths are born of people with misinformation or the inability to do the job. We hear people talk about, the check engine light. The shop just said ignore it. It's no big deal. Well, I interpret that as we don't know what to do, so we're just going to kick the can down the road. So the notion that you go to maybe the general repair shop or maybe the quick drive-through lane or the mass merchandiser, they say it's sealed because it has a dipstick, but really what they mean to say is we're not qualified to work on this.
Nor do we want to. We could be qualified, but it's not convenient for us. I mean, it takes up too much time in a bay.
Yeah, exactly. They're there to push things through. So that's what I think that is. It's code language for we don't know what to do or we don't want to. And a lot of these service ideas, the flush, I mean, we talked about service before the show. What does service mean? It's like kind of someone say, I'll take a hamburger. I mean, you can get a 49-cent cheeseburger.
I want bacon on my hamburger.
Yeah, you can get deluxe. You can get, Durant's has a heck of a hamburger. But the point is, it means a lot of different things to everybody.
Well, and it's not, there's so many. When Tri-City started in 1972, they had a little leaflet with the 10 models of transmission on them. It was pretty simple. They all took the same fluid, and it was, I think it was from whale's oil is where it came from back in that day. But it's now, the book for how many models of transmission is like a phone book. I mean, you can't even keep track of them, and they're not, one's a CVT, one's a dual clutch transmission where it's actually it's a manual transmission with electric motors in it, and then you've got another one that's a 6-speed, you got one that's a 9-speed. They're all different. They all use different fluids, and for a lot of shops to keep track of all that, they don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's part of where that comes from. I mean, it's hard for me to even keep track of all of them.
Well, yeah, they don't want to do it. Or it doesn't fit the business model of quick service. And that's how some of these things like the transmission flush was born. I mean, the traditional service, you want to pull the pan down, inspect the filter, make sure it's not leaking, put a new filter, new gasket, bolt it all back up. Well, the quick lube shops can't do that. So they develop these other methods to allow them to do fast, high-profit service that they can turn real quick. But really, is it really a service or is it a disservice to your transmission? Are you getting value out of it? That's what I want to know.
A bad transmission service, in my mind, is worse than no service at all. So you're better not to service it in comparison to a bad transmission service. But a good transmission service, heck yes, you want to take care of it. We were just talking about transmissions fail 4-1 over engines. We take care of our engine, but we completely neglect. These things are expensive. I mean, a BMW transmission, the modern one, may be $7,500.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And the service isn't cheap. On a BMW, you may spend $500 for a service, but in lieu of $7,500, that's not a bad investment.
Well, and I think the other problem that we see is the manufacturers, again, are into these extended drain intervals. They're marketing a low cost of ownership. And it's the marketing department is really not in tune with the reality department. We say that all the time. The fluid's only so good. You still have dissolved solids in there. You know, the fine particles that make it through the filter. The filter can only do so much. And yeah, the fluid might be okay, but it's all this stuff that's, you know, like the gook, the little stuff, the microscopic stuff that's in there that's wearing out the transmission too.
The biggest thing that we see fail on a regular basis is valve bodies and solenoids and transmissions. Those fail all the time, but what happens, the reason those fail is they get gummed up. They get gummed up with just natural debris that occurs inside the transmission. And those solenoids are like little magnets. So if there's anything floating around that's magnetic, it goes right to the solenoid. And it sticks there, the solenoid starts sticking. The other thing it does is it's great for buffing out those valves and wearing them out. Fresh fluid is a must. And so the point that I want everyone to take away from this, your transmission does not have lifetime fill. It's not sealed for life. And it's just, I mean, we talk about ZF. ZF makes transmissions for Ford. They make transmissions for BMW, for Volkswagen. They're almost across all the manufacturers. And they say you got to service a transmission. But then they put that transmission in, we're going to pick on BMW, and it says, right on the sticker on the pan, it says, filled for life.
Yeah, right underneath.
But those two disagree, but we want to sell a car that looks low cost of ownership because we're just going to multiply the services in the manual versus what they cost. And if we don't put anything in there, it looks like it doesn't cost anything.
Well, in the case of ZF, or if you're Canadian, ZF, we have a bulletin from them where they've sent out and they say, hey, no, what these manufacturers are telling you is not true. That's our transmission. They may have made up something different or lost something in the translation, but I've shared it with you, Dave. Maybe I even got it from you. That transmission that they call lifetime is 62,000 miles is when they want that service. Or what is the lifetime? What do you service it when it blows up? Hey, it's dead. Let's service it now.
All right, let's get a new transmission. Throw it out.
Too late. It's kind of like, you know, it's a little late for a blood transfusion when you've already kicked the bucket.
Well, I think people are wondering, how often should I service my transmission? And do I need it? We've talked about, do you need it? Yes, you do. But how often is that? And I would say as a minimum, just a minimum, it should be done every 50,000 miles. Minimum. I would say across the brands, manual transmissions tend to be a little bit different. They don't run the same. They don't operate the same. They're more of an oil. It's not generally, there's not a pump in there. But automatic transmissions, I would say 50,000 miles, bare minimum. Now, on the more aggressive side of things...
Well, let me time you out for a second. So 50,000 miles, they need a service. But what is a service? What is that? What does that mean?
Whatever you want it to be.
Okay.
I know at the car wash, they stick a straw down the dipstick, and they vacuum out like 3 or 4 quarts, and then they straw in 3 or 4 more quarts. So that's what they call a service. That's different. We do probably 10 to 15 transmission services a week and 52 weeks a year. In a service, in most cars that have a pan and a filter, we go and drive the car first because we want to make sure the transmission's working good before we service it, as it should.
Will a service fix a problem?
On the average, no.
Well, because I mean, a lot of people come in and say, "I need a transmission service because it's doing this." So at the point you have a problem, a service is not the best thing to do. The best thing is get to a shop like Tri-City Transmission, let you experience the problem, because that old fluid tells you a story, right?
It tells us a story, and if you go ahead and service it, you may make the problem worse versus, hey, we need to go in and do this, then go ahead and do the service. So there's different ways to handle these things, but just to go get a service because you think you're starting to have a problem. And I think people in the back of their mind, they feel a shift that doesn't feel quite right. They're like, oh, man, maybe I should get down there for a service. But generally, no, it doesn't fix anything. And so if you're going to go get a service to fix something, you may be wasting your money.
Right, or making you cost more because, like I said, that's like the DNA. That's the stuff that's left behind. That fluid might have chunks in it, or you might be able to look at the filter. Or the other shop maybe didn't change the filter, or they took the filter out and threw it away. Where you cut them open, you take a look at them, and that really tells you the story. It's kind of like having a little bit of blood work done, if you will.
Yeah, we dissect the old filter and see how the transmission's wearing. And you mentioned the flush, and not taking the pan off and not changing that filter, inspecting it. That's doing a disservice because that filter starts to plug up. It's like your air-conditioned filter at home. If you don't change it, the coil freezes up. Mm-hmm. Well, your transmission filter, it's going to do debris, and it's going to start to plug up. And when it plugs up, it restricts the pump, and you run on low line pressure, and the transmission fails. So you're just cutting the life of that thing down.
Right. And we do, at Virginia Auto Service, we do both. We do flush, and we do filter. Sometimes we do them together. Mm-hmm. Sometimes maybe it's every other. So, I mean, the service really needs to be customized to you.
You're looking at it and you're saying, hey, here's what I think is needed. Sometimes you do the pan off and you change the filter, and maybe the next time you don't do that. Maybe you just exchange the fluid.
Right.
And you don't have to worry about that, but maybe every other the way you do it.
And not one service fits all. For example, let's take a Honda, for example. There's a lot of those out there. Some of them now don't have cooler lines. You can't disconnect. And you go to drain that transmission out, and it maybe only holds 3 or 4 quarts that you can drain out. So that's the right kind of service for that car. A flush maybe isn't. Maybe a flush is a waste of money on that car. So I think that's another thing that's important is when you're at your transmission shop or you're at your bumper-to-bumper shop or wherever you are, you have that relationship because they're not just going to be hopefully just turning and burning. They're doing the service that's right and appropriate for the conditions that you've presented.